Well, let's talk about the end of this Parliament, which is officially exactly 3 weeks today. So much focus into what the next Parliament will look like, that the peculiarity of the current one is perhaps being overlooked. Emily, I know you've been writing actually about the dissolution of Parliament over the past week, describing how it shuts up shop and MPs become ordinary members of the public again. That's your article there. Just tell us what the process is then.
Yeah, I just wanted to write this as a kind of explainer about what happens when Parliament breaks up, because it is quite bizarre. There's all these different stages, and obviously we've got the budget next week, but after that you get the finance bill through. Prorogation is when Parliament kind of ends. That's the end of business. But then Parliament dissolves, so that we know that's March the 30th, and that's a Monday. So the MPs will have packed up by then. But basically after that, MPs are no longer MPs until the election, when they might get re-elected.
The old sport, Charlotte, of working out, when the election campaign would kick off, because it was in the gift of the party in power to call the election date, has gone because of the fixed term. And I guess what the upshot of that has been an even longer election campaign.
Yeah, we've had to sort of have an election campaign from January the 5th or something, as opposed to maybe March the 5th. But because we do know now, but prorogation is a wonderfully bizarre. It could only happen in England. It could only happen in the UK Parliament. There's all sorts of tri-cornered hats and all sorts of grand pomp and ceremony. So it's rather a bizarre ceremony that only we could pull off, I think.
I mentioned about MPs getting wound up about the tick on Twitter.
Yes,
what's that about?
You get verified on Twitter, but certain people who are verified, and that's a very nice thing to have, a nice blue tick by your name. If you have MP in that name, for example, Ed Balls MP, you have to get rid of that MP once you're a candidate and no longer an MP. And once you change that name, that tick goes.
So it might be difficult to decipher between which are actually proper accounts in this election campaign and which are jokey ones.
But I think it's a matter of status for a lot of MPs that they want to keep their blue tick. I think it's a bit more personal than that.
Oh dear. All right, well, let's take our weekly look at the BBC poll of polls. And once again, really not much movement at all. Labour still has a slight edge with 34% to the Conservatives, 33%. UKIP in third place with 13% of the vote. Still a big chunk, but down on their performance in the local and European elections last May. The Liberal Democrats fourth with 8%. The Greens are on 7%, and other parties, including Nationalists, share 6% of the public support. Well, let's take a look at how the polls have moved over the past 12 months. And again, not a great deal of movements. The Greens have picked up votes, as have UKIP. But let's take a look at how they've moved over the course of this Parliament, and large gains in UKIP support. The Liberal Democrats have lost a lot of votes, down from 23% at the last general election, and Labour losing some support over the past 2 years as well. So one question is whether the planned TV debates would change anything. The other question, of course, is whether or not they'll actually happen. And of course, there's been a lot of movement actually on whether those debates will go on. I mean, it looked last week like they may not go ahead at all, but the coverage over the weekend is indicating that it's not anywhere near as clear-cut as that.
No, we're still kind of up in the air, aren't we? And it's whether they happen without the Prime Minister, or whether they happen that they add a debate.
And there may well be this situation where we just have, effectively a big set-piece interview with Paxman or someone similar grilling Ed Miliband and David Cameron. Do you think, Charlotte, that's effectively what David Cameron wanted to achieve here? Not having a debate, but, they all still have the platform to actually put out their policies.
It may well be, but I find it bizarre. I understand the Conservative logic, which is we don't want anything. If Ed Miliband does much better than we think he can a week before the election, that's very bad for the Conservatives. So I understand their logic. But also, I don't understand why David Cameron doesn't have enough faith in his own debating ability that he thinks, actually, I can stop that momentum and maybe get over that final hurdle a week before the election, use the debates.
How do you think this plays, Emily? I guess particularly with younger voters. I mean, do younger voters want to see something like a debate? Are the politicians sort of putting more store by it and more concerned by the potential impact than they actually should?
I think a lot of people out there don't really mind either way, and actually when they're asked, they would rather have them but it's whether they would fight for them. TV debates, I think, in the real world don't actually make as much of an impact as we in Westminster like to think, and we discuss it an awful lot. But
and looking back, actually, I mean, and again, I suppose it chimes with what you were saying earlier about the Liberal Democrats, Charlotte, in that Nick Clegg did well, was perceived to have done very well in those debates, but actually the Liberal Democrats lost support at the election.
Indeed, because people suddenly, because it also gave them an opportunity to be squeezed. People saw them, getting a poll boost, and Labour and the Conservative, well, you're going to end up with the other one if you vote Lib Dem, and it actually dampened the Lib Dems' Nick Clegg's success. So there's all these weird dynamics at play. But I do think Emily's right that people don't spend their whole day worrying about whether they're going to be TV debates or not, like we do. But I think they do actually, in principle, like to see their political leaders have to front up against each other in something more civilised than Prime Minister's questions or question time.
Thank you both very much. Emily Ashton from BuzzFeed and Charlotte Henry from